Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this demonstration of ArchiveSpace and an overview of ArchiveSpace member benefits. I'm Jessica Crouch, the Community Engagement Lead for ArchiveSpace, and I'm joined today by ArchiveSpace Lead Program Manager Christine DeBella and ArchiveSpace Program Assistant Bailey Grace Harrell. This session is intended for people considering using ArchiveSpace. If you're already an ArchiveSpace user and hopefully member, this presentation will probably not offer any new information, but you're more than welcome to attend. I'll begin by giving a brief overview of the ArchiveSpace program before moving to a light demonstration of the application itself. After, I'll provide information about ArchiveSpace membership and member benefits. We are using the latest version of ArchiveSpace for this demo. That's version 3.5.1. We do currently have a release candidate out for ArchiveSpace version 4.0, which includes some great new functionality and updates. If you'd like to learn more about that upcoming update, you can learn more on our website. If you're using an earlier version of ArchiveSpace, keep in mind some of the features you see today may not be available to you. We also won't be able to troubleshoot issues with your own implementations of ArchiveSpace at your organization, and we're going to be focusing this demonstration on using the ArchiveSpace staff user interface and public user interface. If you have a question or issue with your own implementation, please email us at archivespacehome@lyrasis.org. All of the links and email addresses and everything I'm going to be referencing today will be included in the slides, and you'll be able to find those with the recording after the demo. The session is being recorded, and all of that information will be made available on our website. So, what is ArchiveSpace? ArchiveSpace is an open source content management system used by archivists in a variety of settings to manage and describe their collections and to optionally make those collections publicly available through our public user interface. ArchiveSpace supports a range of functions performed in archives and special collections, including accessioning, arrangement, description, preservation, and access, and allows archivists to describe a variety of materials, both physical items and digital objects, including born digital material. ArchiveSpace is the successor to two widely used open source applications, Archivist Toolkit and Archon. We know that many archives continue to use these two systems, and we do have migration tools available on our website for those users looking to migrate to ArchiveSpace from those systems. So, in short, ArchiveSpace is developed by archivists, supported by diverse archival repositories, and fills a common need for archives around the world. ArchiveSpace is also a community. While the ArchiveSpace application is free to download and use, ArchiveSpace has a membership model to support the development of the application and user community. Only organizations that are members of ArchiveSpace directly contribute to the sustainability of the application, and because of that support, members of ArchiveSpace are entitled to certain tangible benefits. I'm going to talk about those a little bit more after the demo. But in addition to these benefits, members also serve on the various governance groups within ArchiveSpace, including our User Advisory Council, Technical Advisory Council, and our board. Members are also asked to participate in community discussions and polls about the future development of the application. And in this way, ArchiveSpace members work together to create and improve an archives management application reflecting our values as archivists. That means ArchiveSpace is standards-driven, flexible and extensible, customizable and localizable, and integrates with other applications people use to do their work and promote efficiency overall. And finally, ArchiveSpace is an opportunity. It provides an opportunity for archivists to manage and make available as much of their archival material as possible, no matter their institutional setting. We have ArchiveSpace members working in large government archives and major academic institutions, as well as community archives and lone arrangers working in very small organizations. ArchiveSpace promotes adoption of standards and develops shared best practices across all of these organizations and brings people from different sizes and types of institutions together to solve common problems we all share. ArchiveSpace also provides the opportunity to take all of your work, all of this archival description that you do, and make it available to users via a public user interface, which we're going to see a little bit later. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and just move over to the demo. All right, so I'm going to move away from my slides, and I'm going to move to ArchiveSpace. This is the public user interface. I'm going to start the demo in the staff user interface, though. In this demonstration, I'm going to spend most of our time exploring the ArchiveSpace staff user interface. This is where archivists and those working to describe materials will also be spending most of their time, so that makes sense. After, I will move to the ArchivesSpace public user interface to briefly show what that looks like to researchers and patrons. Before I dive into the demo, I want to mention that all of the examples we're using today are real collections held by ArchivesSpace member organizations. These organizations made their metadata available to the program for the purposes of education and training and in the interest of creating a more diverse set of example data for users. We're very grateful to these organizations for their willingness to share their data. So, like I said, this is the ArchivesSpace staff user interface. It looks kind of simple, sort of plain when you first encounter it, but from this interface, you can do a variety of functions. The staff user interface is sort of divided into 4 areas or zones, and that's how I'm going to break it up for the purposes of this demo. The first area we're going to look at relates to things that impact the application overall. So these are things specific to your system. ArchivesSpace has the ability to create really granular user permissions. I'll touch on those briefly several times throughout this demo, but just keep in mind that a lot of these things that you will see as I'm moving through these sort of higher level functions in the application are only available to those who have the specific permissions to do so. Like obviously you don't want everyone at your organization to be able to make major changes to the application overall, and that is not how ArchivesSpace works. You can be really granular about your permission. But at the top of your staff user interface, you will see a series of drop downs that allow you to manage your application and also manage your repository. These are for doing things like identifying and selecting your repository, which is what this means, select repository. This may not be something that you will use at your organization. This is for those organizations that have multiple repositories or departments that are all using the same ArchivesSpace application, because you want to be able to make all of your archival material discoverable in a single location, of course, but you do want to manage your own records. So you can set up multiple repositories within one ArchivesSpace application. If you are an administrator of your application or have a higher level of permissions, you have the ability to move between those repositories in the application. There are 2 repositories in this test instance, and these are their abbreviations. But if you don't have that level of permission, you're just a regular staff user who works within one single department at your organization, then you would only have access to that one department. But if you had a higher level of permission and you needed to move between different repositories, you would be able to do that here with Select Repository. From the system dropdown, again, these are really high level functions that only certain people would have permissions to do at your organization. So that's things like managing your controlled value list. Those are your dropdowns throughout the application. If you're looking at your own implementation, or if you're looking at our sandbox, those drop downs, unless they relate specifically to like a standard or impact exports, those can be configured. So if you want to add additional items to drop down lists, you can do that here. You can manage container profiles, container meaning like a box. So if you have profiles about the different sorts of containers that you use, we're not going to have time to get into that. You can manage those here. You can manage your location profiles if you're managing locations within ArchivesSpace where your stuff lives. You also can manage those individual repositories, your OAI PMH settings. You can also manage users here. So again, if you are someone who has this level of permission, you can go in and manage your users, assign them to their specific user groups, and make sure that everyone else in the system has the appropriate permissions. And then you can also view your system information. Everything that I just mentioned, if you are a user that does not have that permission to access this material or this area of ArchivesSpace, it will not be available to you or to that user when they select the system dropdown. If they do not have the level of permission that enables access to any of these functions, when a user selects the system dropdown, all they will be able to see is this ArchivesSpace Help Center, and that is a link that takes you out to the ArchivesSpace Help Center, which contains our user manual, user tutorial videos, and recordings of our past trainings. And that is a benefit of membership to ArchivesSpace we'll get into later. Also from this area, you have the ability to manage your preferences. And again, these are dependent on your permissions. If you're an administrator, you have the ability to change preferences at the global level, meaning you can change maybe your browse columns or that sort of thing at the global level. You can also do that at the repository level. And then default preferences are individuals or specific to the user. So if you're a user that would prefer to interact with the application in Spanish, you can do that, and it wouldn't impact other users. Also, if you have the appropriate permissions, you can become a user. This can be really handy if a user is saying, I'm not seeing what you're seeing, maybe because they've changed their own preferences. So if you have that level of permission, you can become another user and check on what they're seeing. And you can manage those user accounts and you can log out. The next area I'm going to mention relates to user permissions and preference management. So again, everything over here is sort of high level. We're not even getting into how to create records yet. But from this geared menu drop down here, you can again do a lot of really high level management. You can manage those permission groups if you have the appropriate permissions to do that. So you can create the granular permission groups that you then add users to. You can manage user access. Again, putting people into those permission groups, creating new users, that sort of thing. You can manage assessment attributes. We do not have time to get into assessments today, but just know that you can make assessments of materials in the archive space and can add attributes to that. And you can also manage top containers being what I mentioned earlier, like those boxes are the highest level of containment for your materials. Normally it means box, but it could mean something different depending on your use case or your repository. You also have the ability to transfer a repository here. That's something that you would do hopefully never or very rarely, but maybe two departments merge and you need to do that. This is also where you can invoke and run background jobs. There are two places you can do that from this screen, and I'll show you the other in just a moment, and you'll get an idea of what some of those background jobs are then. But just know that you can run a background job from the gear menu. And you can also download bulk import templates. This is super handy. This is a great feature in the application. It allows you to download spreadsheets so that you can do work in bulk in spreadsheets and then re-import those spreadsheets. Very, very handy. It's really great that you can download them from directly in the application. It's one of my favorite features. You also have the ability to run reports. So ArchiveSpace has some canned reports that already come automatically with the application. They're kind of basic and may not be exactly what you need, but you can run those reports, or you can create custom reports and then save those templates of those custom reports and then run them here. So this is how you could run reports within the application. And then finally, if you're using any plugins with ArchiveSpace, you can invoke those plugins here as well. ArchiveSpace comes with one plugin out of the box. That's the Library of Congress Name Authority File Import plugin. That allows you to import Library of Congress authorities like for names and subjects. That's the only plugin that ArchiveSpace manages directly, and it's the only one that comes out of the box with ArchiveSpace when you download it. But there are many, many, many other community-generated plugins and resources that you can find online and on our website that sort of amplify and do a lot more within ArchiveSpace. So they're great tools and great add-ons if there's things that you see that you want to do within ArchiveSpace that the application itself doesn't do. But there are a lot of considerations when using plugins, so don't want to lean too heavy on those. All right, so then moving over to the left side of my screen, this is where you are actually going to start doing your archival work, right? So this is where you can create and edit records. You have the ability to select the create dropdown. And from here, you can see the many different record types that you can create within ArchiveSpace. Accession records, resource records, and digital object records are known collectively as material description records. Resource records and digital object records are both allow for multi-level description. I'm going to show that in just a minute. So if you're like, what is she talking about? Don't worry, I'll show you what it looks like in just a minute. But you can create hierarchical records for both our resource records, which are our finding aids, and digital object records. And you can create components. I'll show you what that looks like I said. Accession records are single level in nature. All of the other records, so your subject records, your agent records, your container profiles, locations, events, classifications, assessments, these are all created to amplify your accession records, your resource records, and your digital object records. You'll notice in this dropdown, there's actually like a little line here. And it kind of designates the difference between your material description records and those records that you create to then link to these records or to somehow amplify these records and the materials being described in those records. All of the record types in this create option can be created independently of another record and then linked later to other records. So for example, if you're just getting started with ArchivesSpace, you may want to import a whole lot of subject headings because you know what subject headings you use in your materials, and then you can link them directly to your resources as you create them and kind of populate a thesaurus like that early. Or you may want to create all of your locations in a single batch so that your locations already exist within your application. And then as you're finishing processing material and you're about to put that box on a shelf, you can just assign the location there and it already exists within ArchivesSpace. And then, like I said, the background jobs section, you can go to the gear menu and create a background job that way, or you can go to create background job. And from here, you can select the different background job that you want to use. If you're using some of those spreadsheet templates that I mentioned earlier, you would go to import data and import the spreadsheet template there. Generating a PDF is another really common thing to do for your finding aids. You can create reports, container labels, that sort of thing. Once your records have been created and are saved within your system, you also have the ability to browse records. So you would only be able to browse a record you'd saved, but any records created within ArchivesSpace can be found via browse. And I'm going to use browse in just a moment, so I'll leave that there for now. And then the final thing I wanted to point out within the staff user interface is the ability to search. So you could do a basic keyword search here. Super common, probably what people do the most often, to search across all of your records to find material, or you could create some more advanced search. So ArchivesSpace allows for the inclusion of we'll do text and then we'll do date. 3 different advanced search options here. You have the ability to link your searches together through the Boolean operators and or not, and is the default if you don't indicate it. And then you can also search by date. So if you're looking to create a more granular search, you can do it that way. And then you can also indicate which search field you'd actually like to search instead of across the entire system. So you can create some more granular searches that way. I'll close this. But you can also use a basic keyword search. I'm going to move over now to showing you what individual records look like, but I see some stuff happening in the chat, so I'm going to pause and take a moment for questions.
So there's a couple questions here that I can answer. So one question is there a migration tool from Calm? And I know Calm, we've heard from a number of institutions in the UK specifically that use Calm. And it may be used in other places as well. We just happen to have heard from people in the UK about it. So there isn't a specific migration tool from Calm the way there is from Archivist and Toolkit, as Jessica mentioned, but we do know that it is possible to migrate from Calm to ArchivesSpace. We know of institutions that have done it. And so if you have like some specific questions related to that, feel free to get in touch with us at archivespace@lyrasis.org. It'll be kind of dependent on what kinds of records you want to get into ArchivesSpace, what are some of the specific exports that you can get out of ArchivesSpace. Jessica will, I'm sure, be talking about some of the import pathways into ArchivesSpace, including EAD and MARC, and so and some CSV imports as well. So depending on what you're looking to get out of Calm and bring it into ArchivesSpace, there may be different strategies to do that. We also have a couple questions here about support for ISAG. So ArchivesSpace, again, like we have institutions that we know use ISAG. The underlying content standard for ArchivesSpace is DAX, describing archives a content standard. And so sort of the entry points and some of our tooltips as well are based on DAX and sort of provide specific references to chapters and rules within DAX, but it is very possible to use ISAG in ArchivesSpace as well, especially because there's so much of a relationship between ISAG and DAX. So we do know of institutions that have actually adapted the tooltips in ArchivesSpace and some other things in ArchivesSpace to maybe better provide, clarity on if ISAG is the content standard that you're using, sort of where things go and how to use it, provide a little more guidance that way. And again, feel free to get in touch with us at archivesspacehome@lyrasis.org if you'd like a little bit more information. One of the great things about joining the community of ArchivesSpace members is there's a lot of knowledge out there to help you, guide you in different areas in addition to the program team. I am going to leave the next questions until a little bit later, and we can all get back to Jessica and the demo.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Christine. I'm a little under the weather, so anytime I do that, that means I'm coughing and Christine is answering. But thank you for that, Christine. And before we move on, I'll very quickly mention the questions related to supporting EAD and migration pathways. Earlier, I showed you in the gear dropdown that there's the ability to run background jobs and invoke those bulk import templates. I'll just show you what they look like really quickly. So you do have the ability to import a lot of information via CSV or Excel. For session records, those digital object records, and for archival object records and resource records, as well as importing locations and subject records. And you can download those directly, fill out the information that you need, and then run them about a background as a background job. And you can do that either by going to background jobs or create background jobs. So we'll go ahead and just go to that. We'll do import data. In addition to being able to import those CSVs and Excel spreadsheets, you see the other different formats that you can import into ArchivesSpace. So you do have the ability to import EAD, EAC-CPF, MarkXML directly into your application. So if you're looking to migrate out of one system into another, if you're able to export out EAD or MarkXML, you'll be in great shape. But for now, we're going to go ahead and look at individual record types. So when you want to create a new record, you would go to create a session record. Well, I selected create a session record. You would select create whatever record, but I'm doing a session record for this purpose. And you're provided with a blank template. You'll see it looks pretty standardized. You have a lot of information that you can provide here. Within the application, you'll notice anywhere there's a red asterisk, that means that information there is required. For session records, it's pretty limited in terms of what's required, but here's your red asterisk. You notice that when I keep hovering over this field, I'm provided with this like black pop-up. These are tooltips that help you provide you with specific information about what you're looking at. These rollovers are associated with almost all of the labels in ArchivesSpace. There's another one. You hover your mouse over a particular heading or label to see the rollover text. Typically, the rollover consists of a definition of the element, a reference to the appropriate rule in DAX, or to elements in export data formats such as MARC or EAD, and examples of good practice. These are completely customizable though, so if you want to change them for your organization, you can. Maybe you are using ISAG instead of DAX, that would be an option. Instead of spending a lot of time looking at just a blank record, I am going to move over to some created records, and we can talk about session records, resource records, and digital object records using real example data. So I'm going to go to Browse a Sessions. So this is what the browse screen looks like for a session records. You're able to filter by text There are only 4 accession records here, so I don't need to filter, but if you had many accession records at your organization, you would want to do that. So you could filter by text or by the linked data information here, but I'm not going to do that. I don't need to. I'm going to go to the Krispy Kreme corporate records accession. You have the ability from this window to either view an accession record, meaning just looking at it in view mode, you can't make any changes, or in edit mode. Typically, you're going to want to look at it in edit mode because that's where you can kind of manipulate information the most. Also notice that from a browse screen, you have the ability to create an accession record. This is if you're browsing and you realize, oh my gosh, there is no accession record for this record. I need to create it. So you can hit create there. I don't need to do that. I'm going to go into edit mode for the Krispy Kreme corporate records. So here you see a saved accession record. This has all of the required information, which again is pretty limited for an accession record, as well as much more information because you're going to want to include more information than just that. Accession records store information about the receipt of materials that typically means this collection is unprocessed. An accession record may be for a single item or an aggregation of materials. It can represent the acquisition of a new resource or an accrual of an existing collection. An accession record must record the accession identifier and date of the accession, and an accession record may include much more descriptive information like I mentioned. They can also be linked to other types of archive space records, like your existing resource records, your digital object records. You might want to link subjects and names, different collection management functionality, and even to other accession records themselves, especially if this is like an accrual of an existing collection. I'll scroll all the way down to the bottom so you can get a sense of the type of information being included. But again, anywhere you don't see a red asterisk, that means it's not required. So really think about at your organization what's appropriate to include and what's not. And you can see here some linked records. So these are linked to agent records. Anywhere you see this dark blue, that means that is a linked record. That is a subject or an agent record that exists within ArchivesSpace itself and has been linked to this record. If you want to view that separate record, you would just click this and go to view. We're not going to do that. We're not really going to have time to get into subjects and agents, but that means there's another record there. There's also a related resource record. This collection has already been processed and the resource record is available. So if you'd like to find that, you would just, again, select view and you'd be taken to the resource record. So that's an accession record. I'm going to scroll back up to the top, point out one thing really quickly before we move to resource records. So when you're creating a session record, you're creating a lot of really good description there, and you may want to recycle some of it so you don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. So session records have the ability to spawn. All that means is basically it auto-populates some information into a new record type for you to make your life easier. So if I was getting a new accrual of the Krispy Kreme corporate records and I needed to create a new accession record, I could go to this record that already exists and create and spawn or a new accession record. And it would bring over the data that already exists, much of the data that already exists, and I would have a jump start on my new accession record. Same is true for a resource record. If it's time to process this new accession, you don't really want to have to take all of this work that you've already done and put it into a new resource record. So some of that information will map over to the new resource record. Not all, because it's not all the same. The information you record in a session record isn't the same for a resource record. It also does not bring over any sort of lists or anything to create your hierarchy. You have to do that yourself. And then finally, you can also spawn or auto-populate a new archival object record. That's a child record of a resource record, which I know sounds kind of jargony. But that just means like if this was an accrual of a pre-existing collection and it was going to be moved into a series for that pre-existing collection, you could spawn it as an archival object of a collection and say this is a series of that. So you can nest it in a pre-existing finding aid essentially. So with that, I'm going to move away from accession records and I'm going to show you resource records very briefly. I'm going to also try to start talking faster. I always do this. So again, I've gone to browse resources, and this is a browse list of my resources. Many more resources available here. Again, I could filter by text if I was looking specifically for something and I'm not finding it, or I could search by shared subjects to find collections that are related to one another. I could indicate whether, or I could search whether or not a collection is published to the public user interface or not, and the language of materials. And I'll talk about publishing in when we talk about the public user interface. But I would like to look at the diary of Emma Cummins Snively. So I'm going to look at that in edit mode. Again, you can do view or edit, and you can also create a new record if you find that you can't find it in the browse screen here. Let's go to edit. So this is a created and saved resource record. Looks very similar to a record that the accession record that we looked at, except there's much more required information and there are different fields. So it's not really the same, but it does have the same look and feel. Once you save a record, you will be presented with a lot of this matter right at the top. I'm not going to talk about this section now. I'm going to show you a collection that has a lot of hierarchy in just a minute, and you'll see what that a collection with hierarchy looks like here. But if this did have child records like series and subseries and items, that would all be listed here. You also have the ability to do a lot of things to impact the entire collection once you save the record, including the ability to publish all, meaning publish everything to your public user interface, and unpublish all, meaning unpublish everything to your public user interface, or to view what has been published. So that's really helpful if you're using the public user interface in ArchivesSpace. And again, you'll see what that looks like in just a minute. You also have the ability to export a variety of exports, including EAD. So you can download your EAD or your MarkXML if you need to contribute that to maybe a finding aid aggregator or to your cataloging system. You can also download container labels and container templates, and you can also generate a PDF of your resource record. So if you wanted to have a PDF of your finding aid, you could do that here. You also have the ability to merge a collection. This would maybe be useful if you were you realize that one collection that you had created needed to be completely reprocessed, and you had one series you wanted to merge or something. There are use cases for wanting to merge two resources together, or you could transfer it to a repository within your ArchivesSpace implementation. So if those materials got moved from one department to another, you could do that here. There are also a few other functions that you can do, like create an assessment, like I mentioned, as well as calculating the dates for the collection and its extent, but we won't get into that. So this is a resource record, like I said. Resource records within the context of ArchivesSpace are defined as materials that are in the custody of your repository and being controlled according to archival principles. A resource can be a whole collection or a single item. In this case, it's a single item, it's a diary, and it's identified by a title and an identifier. Resource records are where you place the bulk of the information about the intellectual and physical characteristics of archival materials. So you can add a range of descriptive elements. I'm going to start scrolling slowly. You can also add notes, like write statements, and you can also link different records to your resource record. Resources can be supplemented with certain context and by linked related records like your accession record. So if the related accession record could be linked here, digital object records, subject headings, things that might help link your relevant collections together. The resource record module is where you build your finding aid, and it's essentially where you can build out this description. And I'll show you in just a minute what the hierarchy looks like as well. And as I mentioned, you can always export this out as EAD, MarkXML, or PDF. So you'll see it's a lot more information than what is in an accession record can be described here. Again, this collection also has some linked agents, some linked subjects, and some linked notes. Notice here that anytime there's more than 5 of any one of these subrecords, ArchivesSpace automatically collapses them. It's just to help with like functionality, but if you want to see what's there, you just have to click it. So you see there are 6 subject records that exist within this application that are linked to this related collection. And there are 12 notes for this. So you can really get very granular and include as much notes as you need. And you can also do things like create instances. We're not going to have time to get into instances, but this is where if you have a box and that box is somewhere in your holdings, you can indicate this material is held in box 1 of that collection. You could even say box 1, folder 1, box 1, folder 1, sleeve 1. You can get kind of granular about your containers, but here you would indicate what that top container is, which for a lot of us is usually a box, but it could be other things. All right, I'm going to scroll really quickly back up to the top, and I'm going to show you one more resource record. Just very briefly, I will show you what a resource record with hierarchy looks like. So this is a collection that has items and files within it, and it has archival object records essentially. So this is what I meant when I said I'll show you what this looks like later. So if you have a collection level record, this looks very similar to what we just looked at for the diary. It includes all of the same information, all of the same fields, but now this has children. You can add those children in a variety of ways. You can do it manually by adding a child, adding a sibling. You could do it using the load via spreadsheet functionality, which is very popular. You would again invoke that through those templates that we mentioned. Or you could use our rapid data entry tool, which sort of creates a kind of like a spreadsheet within the application itself. So there are many different ways that you could get this information in if you wanted to add that hierarchy. Within this collection, we're looking at mostly items and files, but you could indicate various levels. Let's look at an individual child. So this is a file, but you could have a different many different levels of description. All right, and then finally, I'm going to briefly show you some digital object records. Before we look at digital objects, please keep in mind that ArchivesSpace is not a digital asset management system. You cannot ingest or store digital materials into ArchivesSpace. ArchivesSpace supports the management of digital object metadata, so it allows you to manage description of your archival holdings within a single system. So you can describe your physical materials and your digital materials within one location and then link them together. You could add digital object records to your resource records if you have digitized surrogates of your material, or it could be standalone digital object records for like your born digital materials. But the digital files themselves need to be stored somewhere else. ArchivesSpace does not ingest those files. You can export your digital object files as METs, MODs, and Dublin Core. And like I said, link them to related accession and resource records, as well as any of their component records. Similar to a resource record, digital object records can be structured as both simple and complex. The terminology around digital objects can get really confusing, and for the purposes of the demo, we don't have a ton of time. So I won't really get into that, but what I'll mention now is we do have several digital object trainings available on our website. If you really want to dive into digital objects and you're not sure if you're ready to commit to ArchivesSpace or ArchivesSpace membership, I would recommend going to our YouTube channel or our website and viewing those there. But I will show you an example of both a complex digital object and a simple digital object, but just know that there's no like right or wrong answer about how to describe your collections as either simple digital objects or complex digital objects, and you'll see that in just a minute. So the first example I'm going to show you is of a simple digital object. At this point, this probably looks very familiar. It looks very similar to a resource record, but again, the information being described is different because it is specific to digital materials. This is saved, so you can see again we have a variety of options available to us, including that ability to export the METs, MODs, or Dublin Core metadata. Anywhere you see a red, that means that is information that is required for a digital object record. And what you will notice that is very different is that there is a file version section for digital objects that does not exist for resource records or accessions. This is where you would put the link or the file path to that digital material. So since ArchivesSpace doesn't ingest that content, it doesn't live in ArchivesSpace, it needs to know where that material lives, and you would do that via the file URI. There are some ways to get this material to sort of display within ArchivesSpace to have some representative imaging within your application. It's really cool on your public user interface, but that does not mean the file is living within the application itself. And again, I really recommend, if you are already an ArchivesSpace member, reviewing the recordings and the user manual around digital objects and representative images in the user manual. And if you're not, viewing some past trainings on our YouTube channel. But again, this is where you include that information about the file itself, how you want the file to render in the application, and different things specific to the digital file itself. It's not a digital preservation system, but if you are using it for things like checksums and that sort of thing, you can definitely do that there as well. Many organizations integrate ArchivesSpace with their digital preservation system though, so you may elect to use that system instead of ArchivesSpace, and ArchivesSpace is simply the system of record for both your digital and physical materials. Beyond that, it does look very similar to the resource record that I showed you, but you can include notes, subjects, agents, link related collection records, and that sort of thing. But like I said, this represents a simple digital object. It's one in which the intellectual content of the object is contained in one digital file. So that means that this file, this link, shows you this image. That's it. When you go, everything described within this record is being shown or displayed within this one single image. So you could have a simple digital object that's a scrapbook that's 100 pages, and you scan all 100 pages and you convert it to one single PDF. Even though it's 100 pages, it's still a simple digital object because it's one PDF. However, if you had that same scrapbook and you scanned all 100 pages and every single JPEG of 100 pages was its own individual file, you had 100 JPEGs, then that would be described as a complex digital object. It's the same information, it's just how you choose to describe it and display it within ArchivesSpace. So let's look at a complex digital object very briefly. Very similar to the resource record, you see here that this is a complex digital object. The collection level or the top level digital object is describing what is included in all of those child records. It provides information about the collection or the grouping as a whole. And then when you select an individual child record, that is where you would include the information about the individual file URI for that specific file. So to my example before, we were talking about a scrapbook. You would maybe include all the information about the or you would include all the information about the scrapbook at the top. So it could be like the Jessica Crouch scrapbook, and then you would have pages 1 through 100 as child records below. Again, I really recommend checking out our trainings and things on YouTube related to digital objects. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and move over to the public user interface. And then once I do the public user interface, I'll talk briefly about member benefits, and then we'll do some Q&A. So to go to the public user interface in ArchivesSpace from the staff user interface, you just have to hit public user interface and it takes you right over. Again, the public user interface is optional. And it also means that the public user interface only displays material that you elect to publish. So when you save content to ArchivesSpace, it's automatically indexed and saved within your system. It is not automatically published to the public user interface. You need to select those publish options that are found throughout the application to publish your material. And again, totally optional to use the public user interface. Some repositories choose to export their metadata outputs into other systems or other front ends or make the PDFs available on their website. Not everyone uses the public user interface, but it's great to have that option already built into the application. This is what the default homepage of the public user interface looks like without any customizations. Obviously, you don't want it to look like this. You can use or you can customize the public user interface in a variety of ways. You can change the logo. Obviously, you're going to want to include your own logo. You can change the colors, the theming. You can get really granular about your customizations. And again, there's also like plugins for the PUI that people use to make it more customized. I'm not going to do as deep a dive, obviously, in the public user interface, but here's what I will say. It allows users to search similar to what we saw in the staff user interface. So they could do a basic keyword search. They are able to limit the records that they'd like to search and the search fields that they would like to search, as well as include dates. And similarly to the staff user interface, they can use make really complex searches with the Boolean operators and or not, and various search terms and fields for those individual fields as well. Remove. They also have the ability to browse. So all of these headings here relate to different or different record types within the staff user interface. Again, very customizable. Unprocessed materials means the session records. Very normal for an organization to hide this entirely. Don't make your session records publicly available. That's pretty common. You may want to change what you call some of these headings. Again, totally customizable. But users are allowed to search by repository. You can see within this implementation there are 2 repositories. So you could search you're going to go to this one specific research center and you want to do research there. You're able to search their collection specifically. Or you could browse across all collections. And again, you can really filter your result so you can search both by date as well as keyword term, and then look at additional filters here. This is where it becomes really handy to make use of linked records like subject records and agent records, because then your researchers are able, if they know what subject they're researching, they're able to find all related material there across all of your repositories. It's really great for researchers. And if they're specifically looking for a subject, like I said, they can search for subject terms themselves. Let's see. And all related collections will pop up. Here there's only one related collection, but if there are a bunch, that would be very helpful. You also can include information like contact information and FAQs and that sort of stuff for your researchers to make it easier for them to know how to find you and contact you and request materials. So I can do that way. Finally, let's go back to the diary we looked at earlier. And I'll just show you what a resource record looks like. So this is a saved and published resource record within ArchivesSpace. This is all of that information that we saw whenever we were exploring the record earlier, represented for the public user. So they have ability to read all of those notes, look at all of that linked information, as well as the ability to look if there was a collection organization, and I can look at a more complex record if anyone asks, you would see that there, as well as container inventory. But this is how it would appear to a researcher. For digital materials, I'll just briefly show. If you do make use of that representative image functionality that I talked about, they'd be able to see like a tiny little thumbnail of what the representative image for the collection or the digital object was. So it makes it a little more visually interesting for them. Again, it doesn't live in ArchivesSpace, but that is a neat functionality. But you can see all the digital records here as well. All right. So I'm going to stop the demo. I know there are some questions. I see them popping up. But I want to very briefly talk about ArchivesSpace membership, and then we'll move into the Q&A. As I mentioned before, while the application is free to download and use, ArchivesSpace has a membership model to support the development of the application and user community. Since ArchivesSpace members directly contribute to the sustainability of the application, they're entitled to certain benefits, in addition to that ability to serve on governance councils and provide input on the development of the application that I mentioned. Currently, we have 514 ArchivesSpace member organizations. Membership is at the organizational level. It's not for individuals. And all employees within an organization are entitled to benefits regardless of your size or how much staff you have. Membership is distributed across 5 levels with corresponding fees. Membership levels range from very small, which has a $300 per year membership fee, to very large, which has a $7,500 per year membership fee. I will mention over half of our members are either very small or small organizations. Membership levels are intended to reflect organizational size and capacity, and all members are entitled to the same benefits regardless of the size of your organization. Everyone is represented equally. In addition to these benefit levels, I'll just mention that we have other types of memberships and affiliations for organizations working with ArchivesSpace outside of normal archival work. So for example, we have a free educational program membership for educators using ArchivesSpace in the classroom. And then like a consortia provider program for consortia supporting organizations that use ArchivesSpace, and a registered service provider program for organizations that provide services like hosting of the application. But for the purposes of today, I'm speaking specifically about general membership. I'm going to be providing a series of links at the end of this presentation with this information and more, and I'll make sure to link all of the slides with the recording. So what are these benefits I keep talking about? Member benefits include access to the Help Center. I showed you one way that you could get that through the application itself, but you can also get it through our website. Access to the Help Center includes our access to our user manual, our user tutorial videos, and recordings of past training. So if you miss a live training, you can always watch the recording later. You don't have to have registered. You get access to member-only events and programs like our ArchivesSpace member like our ArchivesSpace member forums. We hold those in person and virtually every year. We also have an ArchivesSpace member match program, which is a peer-to-peer support program. You also get access to member-only listservs where members communicate with one another, and it's also where we broadcast important news and announcements. You receive discounts on training. You also get technical support, which is very handy. And you get the ability to collaborate with archivists around the world and to help guide and develop the application in our member community. So being part of our member community is really beneficial to you, but it's also really beneficial to the profession and to users overall. And finally, this slide, again, which will be included with the recording, and contains helpful links to references as you explore ArchivesSpace. You can also find all of this on our website. The first link is to our Getting Started page. That's a really handy web page. If you're interested in learning more, I recommend starting there. The bottom link is also, or the next link includes all of our benefits, fees, and levels. So if you're interested in membership, you can learn more about that there. If you're interested in membership, but you're not the person that makes that decision at your organization, we have a link here on making a case for archive-based membership. So that way you can talk to the person who makes those decisions at your organization about the importance of membership. And then finally, we have a webpage called Who's Using Archive Space. So if you're interested, if there are users in your region or maybe in comparable organizations, you can find a list of members on our Who's Using Archive Space page. And then, like I said, you can always contact us at archivespacehome@lyrasis.org. And with that, I'm going to move over to the Q&A. I'm going to pop back into the application because I imagine that's what the questions are going to be about. And let's see. All right. A lot of questions. All right, so Mary asked if we can talk about reports and what are the ones provided. Just because of time, I'm not gonna be able to talk extensively about reports. We do have some training and documentation on reports in our help center. You can view what the CAN reports are by going to the gear menu and selecting reports, and from there you'll see an explanation of all of the different pre-created reports within the application itself. If none of those work for you, you can always go to custom report templates and create a template. Um, if you are interested in using custom reports, I definitely recommend playing around with it so that you can see if it works specifically for your use case. It can't do everything for everyone, but it is pretty powerful. So keep in mind when you're creating reports, maybe don't set your limit to be incredibly high to begin with because it is a very resource intensive part of the application. But you can get pretty granular about your reports and the record type that you're trying to create the report about. Again, because of time, we're not going to be able to get into that, but I definitely recommend exploring that. And if you don't have Archive Space downloaded at your organization, you can always use our sandbox. So if you go to our website, either via the Getting Started page or just go directly to our sandbox, you can use that as an open play space. It's username and password are both admin and admin. You can try it out for yourself. Just keep in mind it is public, so don't put anything there you don't want other people to see. Christine, I'm going to ask you, could you answer the question about support for ISAAR CPF?
Sure. So Archive Space does have support for EAC CPF, which again, like with DAX and ISAD-G, there's a very close relationship there. So if you use ISAR CPF rather than EAC CPF, you may need to do some crosswalking, but you absolutely can, and you can use those tooltips to provide better guidance to your staff users of, what it means each field.
Thanks. Rebecca asks about the security side of Archive Space. Does the program support higher level security programs that government data requires? Can we cordon off certain materials from public view or put in a right to know portal? So the Archive Space application does not manage individual implementations of Archive Space. We don't have access to your data. We don't have access to your instance. You can use a hosting provider if you'd like, or you can download it locally. It sounds like in your use case, you probably would download it locally, and you can definitely put it maybe on a server where there is no outside public access. And again, the public user interface is totally optional. I'll also mention that how you define public is up to you. If you work for an agency where you don't really want everyone to have access to the staff user interface, but you do want people to have access to the public user interface, you can make your internal staff make that available to your internal staff. You don't necessarily have to put it publicly online. So if you have specific security questions, if you want to email us at archivespacehome@lyrasis.org, we can answer those. But like I said, if you download and run it locally, you can get kind of specific about how you want it to be configured. If you migrate yourself, does it give you errors if your data needs cleanup? What does it look like to import, for example, somewhat messy EAD or CSV? Yeah, that's going to happen. If you run a background job and it fails, you'll get a report letting you know with an error log in it, letting you know what specific issues it ran into. For the load via spreadsheet functionality that I showed you for resource records, you can actually validate those spreadsheets before you import them, which is really handy. So you can get validation for that if there's errors, you can fix them and then you can re-import it so you don't have to worry about importing something that's really messy. And like I said, if you're running a background job, if you get a failed background job, it will give you an error log and let you know where those errors came in. That being said, if there are things like spelling errors or maybe some incorrect linkages, ArchiveSpace isn't going to know that. So it is very likely that you're going to have a messy import. Like there's no such thing as a perfect import, but there are tools in place to help catch those sorts of things. Is there any form of location movement control functionality in ArchiveSpace? So you can manage locations in ArchiveSpace, and if you're doing things like maybe um, moving your collections, or you're doing some sort of renovation of your building and you have to do a temporary move, you can indicate if a space is temporary or not. But ArchiveSpace is not a circulation management system. So if you mean in terms of making requests of material and moving it to your reading room and that sort of thing, ArchiveSpace does not have that sort of functionality, but it does integrate with systems that do that sort of thing like Aeon. So depending on exactly what you're looking at, it depends, but you can track and manage your locations within ArchiveSpace. How can ArchiveSpace be integrated with digital preservation systems? Any existing integrations with Archivematica or Preservica? So great question. Yes, there are existing integrations. Preservica specifically, I know has an active integration. ArchiveSpace has an open API, so in theory, it can integrate with any system that wants to integrate with it. I would recommend going to our webinar webpage where we have a series called Integrating with ArchiveSpace, and these are not all of the integrations that exist. They're just, it's a series of integrations from a moment in time, but there are webinars related to both Archivematica and Preservica there. So be sure you check those out. I do know we're at the top of the hour, so technically this is concluded, but since we do have a few more questions in the Q&A, I'm going to answer those before we wrap up, but there's no expectation anyone stay. So thank you so much to everyone for coming to this demo, and we'll keep plowing through the questions as we go. Is there a partner product that does provide digital preservation? We plan to use Lyrasis to host, but do we need Lyrasis plus ArchiveSpace plus another service to have a visually compelling catalog? So if you're using a hosting provider, including Lyrasis, we have two registered service providers. One is Lyrasis and one is Atlas Systems, but there are many different hosting providers out there. Hosting is separate from membership to ArchiveSpace. So any relationship you have with a hosting provider will be separate. If you're looking at a digital preservation system, we don't have one that we recommend over any others. We do have systems that already have pre-existing integrations that maybe would make more sense. But there are also other open source systems like Omeka that you may want to look at out there. But again, if you want to email us directly, we can provide you with more information. While our listservs are member-only benefit, there is a non-member ArchiveSpace Google group out there that's open to anyone, and that's another place where you can maybe pose that question asking about recommended digital preservation systems. You also do not have to use a digital preservation system to use ArchiveSpace. People manage their digital objects in a variety of ways, including just keeping them secure on a server or using, some sort of cloud storage solution and then linking that way. So it isn't dependent on using a digital preservation system to use ArchiveSpace for your digital objects. So there's a question about Arabic language for the user interface and data stored. So currently you can input any language you'd like into the application, but the application itself has only been translated into 5 languages. That's English, Spanish, French, Japanese, and German. Though I will mention that we use an open source tool called Weblate to facilitate more community translations. All of our translations have been provided by the community. I'm going to be presenting a webinar on December 19th on how to use Weblate. So if anyone is interested in providing a different translation or a partial translation in any other language, please do either look at the documentation we have on our website about Weblate or come to that webinar. But currently, no, we do not have any Arabic language UI translations. We're also in the process of a project to allow for multilingual description in the application so that you can describe your materials in multiple languages if that's how you prefer to display your information, or if you're in many instances required to display that information. Can the public user interface be more granular in access control? Public users can log in and be assigned different access rights. Currently, that's not possible, but we know that that's really popular functionality that people want. ArchiveSpace has like I said, it's a community supported application. So we have the ability, or users have the ability to request new features as well as report bugs. And then new requested features are commented and encouraged by our community. And then based on that community input, we have a development prioritization subteam that elevates those tickets for development for our developers. That is an incredibly popular feature request, one that I also would like to see in the application, and is one that is currently being talked about. So I would encourage you to review. I'm not sure if there's an active ticket for that, so I would encourage you, if you're interested, to look in our catalog. You can go to development.archivespace.org to see that and see if there is a ticket. If there isn't, create one. All right, we are caught up in the Q&A, and I see that Christine also answered some of those questions by text. So thank you so much. Not seeing anything else pop up in the Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and stop. Thank you to everyone who made it until the very end and waited until the end of this session. I know we went over a little bit, so thank you so much, and thank you for bearing with me as I'm a little bit under the weather. If you have any other questions or would like any other information about ArchiveSpace or ArchiveSpace membership, please do email us at archivespacehome@lyrasis.org or visit our website. We have a lot of great resources on our website. But again, thank you so much, everyone, and I'll see you online soon. Bye.